Good evening. You're watching Bharat Voice. This is yet another session. I am Ritika Acharya, and today we have a very special interview. Today we have a guest who's joining with us today straight from USA. I'm talking about Jennifer Zeng. Jennifer Zeng has taken out time specially to talk to us today. Jennifer Zeng is an author. She's a YouTuber. She has her own YouTube channel called Inconvenient Truths. And she also has an award-winning documentary in her name, which is called Free China. Jennifer Zeng grew up in China, and now she lives in New York, USA. Also, she's a Falun Gong practitioner. In the course of the interview, we'll understand what is Falun Gong and what exactly happens in China and China's relation with the world. But let's start with the interview today. Thank you, Jennifer, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so, Jennifer, I have to say this before I start the interview, that India and China, if you look in the history in the 18th century, we've had beautiful relations. We've had beautiful trade relations. And, some of the history texts tell us that there was a time when India and China were contributing around 50% of the GDP. Now is a situation in today's global world that India and China are not only facing issues at the border, China is also having a lot of issues with the other part of the world, with other countries as well. So my first question, before I move on to the global relations of China with other countries, my first question is, let's understand a little bit about you. You are a Falun Gong practitioner. What exactly is Falun Gong? Is it similar to the practices of yoga and meditation in India, or is it something different? Because the Indian audience people in India still don't know much about Falun Gong and what goes on. Please.
Okay, Falun Gong, actually, I think it should be very, very easy for Indian people to understand Falun Gong, because Falun Gong, we regard ourselves as a school of Buddha system, Buddha teaching. And we also believe in the existence of Buddha. And the purpose of practicing or cultivating Falun Gong is also to achieve Buddhahood, or to go to, where Buddha lives. So that's, I think, a lot of different religions believe in the existence of paradise, of heavens, and while in your time on the earth here, you cultivate yourself, you improve yourself, so that after you leave this world, you have a better place to go. So in this sense, I think Falun Gong is where, I think, in terms of keeping a physical fitness and mental health, it's very similar to yoga and other kind of meditation. But Falun Gong has, I think, a very specific aspect where it has a whole set of profound teachings and profound understandings of the world, of human life, of the society, and even it has very detailed instructions about how you should interact with other people, interact with your family. So it's like, we can say, a holistic system to improve a person's body, mind, spirit. So it is very beneficial and peaceful movement. And the three main principles to follow in your daily life are truthfulness, compassion, forbearance or tolerance, and plus 5 sets of very gentle exercises, very much like yoga.
And you've been a Falun Gong practitioner for how many years? For how long have you been doing this?
I started doing it in 1997, so it's 23 years. And the good news is, before I practiced Falun Gong, I actually lied in the hospital for several years. I couldn't go to work. I couldn't look after my daughter. My health was totally ruined. But my health recovered only after 1 month of daily practice of Falun Gong. And it's 23 years now. I never, ever got sick. In this whole 23 years, I never spent 1 penny on medication. I saved a lot of money for Australian government and now maybe for the US.
Right. But Jennifer, we're talking about the very beneficial health aspects of Falun Gong, but we cannot help but mention that, today is 20th July. And if I'm not wrong, today it's exactly 20 years since the crackdown of the Falun Gong happened in China. And
Yes.
we really want you to tell our viewers as to what exactly happened in 1989.
Actually, today, yes, like you said, is exactly the 21st anniversary of the crackdown on Falun Gong. 21st in 1999. So 21st
1999.
years, 1999. So 21 years ago today,
Right.
exactly today, I was arrested and detained with like thousands of other Falun Gong practitioners in a sports center in Beijing, because that was the day the Chinese Communist Party officially started to crack down on Falun Gong, and they round up thousands of Falun Gong practitioners and put us in the sports center because there were no such big venues to hold thousands of Falun Gong practitioners in one place. So that day, actually, many sports centers, not only the one I was in, were used to detain Falun Gong practitioners, because they want to launch an overwhelming campaign and, you can say, crackdown on Falun Gong. And the Communist Party's goal at that time is to eradicate Falun Gong, maybe within 3 months.
Right. So what exactly happened, Jennifer? You were imprisoned, and this happened in 1999. And we also hear about these labor camps, and also I think the known re-education camps. What happened in those camps? Also, I have to tell you this very interesting incident. So we lived in London for a couple of years, and I remember this one time where we were outside the British Museum, and I remember this lady walking up to me, and she had a pamphlet in her hand, and she told me about Falun Gong. And back then, I didn't know anything about it. And she told me that there are cases in China where Falun Gong practitioners suddenly disappear. So what exactly happens? Please throw light on that.
Yes, I myself was arrested 4 times and then thrown into
4
Beijing
times.
female labor camp. Yeah, 4 times. The first time was exactly today, 21 years ago. And after that, 3 another times. And then thrown into a female labor camp in Beijing, which was only maybe some 20 kilometers away from Tiananmen Square. So because, China is a country under absolute control of the Chinese Communist Party. As long as it decided to crack down a group of people, it all the resources of society to do so. So many Falun Gong practitioners were detained in detention centers, labor camps, prisons, even mental hospitals. And some ordinary hotels, schools, maybe were all used as a location to temporarily detention Falun Gong practitioners. And the purpose, like the police told us on our first day in the labor camp, was to get us reformed, which means to force us to denounce our own belief in truth, compassion, and forbearance.
Oh, so
and
you were
to be
imprisoned and you were told, I'm sorry, you were imprisoned and you were told that now you have to denounce Falun Gong. And now what exactly that you have to practice after that? What happens after?
Yeah, there were 5 steps for them to measure whether you have been reformed or not. First, you need to write up a statement to say, I would break away from Falun Gong. I promise I will not practice Falun Gong anymore. And then you need to turn in all your Falun Gong books, like music, videotapes, to show you are not going to read those books or to the exercises anymore. And then you need to write long essays to say, why do you decide to give up Falun Gong? How evil is Falun Gong is? What kind of damage has Falun Gong done to you? And then you need to go public. You need to read out your criticized article of Falun Gong in front of maybe all the inmates in the labor camp. There were about 1,000 of them when I was in the camp. And have your speech video recorded as a record, so you will not go, swallow your words. There's a public record there. You are recorded with on the videotape, and then lastly, you have to help the police to torture your fellow Falun Gong practitioners who have not been reformed yet. So if you can't accomplish all these 5 steps, you are still regarded as have not been reformed.
And is that when you decided to leave the practice? What did you do after that?
Oh, it was a long story. That's why I decided, actually, after I was sentenced for 1 year in the labor camp. After I spent about 6 months in the labor camp, and I witnessed so much inhumane and unimaginably, cruelty in the labor camp. I felt I was sent back in the Nazi concentration camp during World War II. I couldn't believe this was still happening in the 21st century. Every day I was either tortured myself, like electric buttons, sleep deprivation, beaten up. I hear the screams of other people being tortured all the time. So I suddenly developed a very strong desire to write a book, to document what I see, what I experienced. I think this is the darkest history in China's history, and the largest scale human rights abuse, and a very dark page in human history. After Second World War, human being as a whole vowed never again. But this is happening again. And to myself. So as an educated person, as an intellectual, I somehow felt it's my historic responsibility. So I developed a desire to write a book. But immediately I was faced with this kind of dilemma. If at that time I had been trying to withdraw all kinds of torture imposed on me, and I refused to reform. But after I developed this desire to write a book, if I still insist on not reforming, I would never ever be released. Even after I served my 1 year sentence, they will just give me another 3 year, 5 year one. Easy. So for the next 6 years, I struggled so hard. I almost killed myself because I cannot balance all these, relationships, whether I should reform, whether I should not, and to what extent shall I go to try to convince the police that I had been reformed. It was such, I think no human being should ever be subjected to that kind of mental struggle. Even in the history where the Christians were persecuted, where Jews were thrown into the gas rooms to be killed, they were only killed physically. They were not forced to renounce what they cherish more than their lives in order to expose the evil. And I saw with my own eyes there were so many fellow Falun Gong practitioners driven into insanity because of the unimaginable cruel torture. For example, one female, she is now also live in New York, Flushing. She was not allowed to sleep for 42.
Was she your fellow Falun Gong practitioner? Now she lives in New York.
Yes, not with me. She also lives in New York City. She was in the same labor camp as me, but after I was released. So she was not given any sleep at all for 42 days and nights and subject to continuous torture. I think no human being could withhold that kind of torture. That is absolutely, I think, inhuman, and this should never happen to mankind. And I think the outside world have a very hard time to understand to what extent the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, could go to do evil, to deprive people of their basic rights and of their dignity, and of course their physical, even their physical existence. So I wrote all this in my book. So I hope people can have a read of my book.
Definitely.
Witnessing.
Jennifer, Jennifer, it's very sad to hear these stories. Even in today's times, there are many people who don't know about Falun Gong. Just like how I said, the Indian audience here still does not know much about Falun Gong, and that's why I really apologize to bother you and take you back to those terrible memories of yours. But we had to talk about this so that people still know and read about Falun Gong and try to understand as to what these movements were. Also, because we hear of many such things that happened. The Tiananmen Square incident happened. Also, we hear about labor camps. Like I said, we also hear about these re-education camps. So there are many stories that we hear about China. Recently, there's a documentary which is becoming very popular on Amazon, which is called The One-Child Policy of China. And when you see that, and I speak to many of my Indian friends, and when they see that, they can't believe that this actually happened in China. So coming back to the other issues that China is now having with the world, one question generally pops up that China is also appreciated a lot in the global world for great infrastructure, quick, rapid development. So how are they able to do this? Is there a reason behind that? Are there land grabs that are responsible for this? How are they able to quickly build such massive bridges and roads and such quick development in China? Then everyone says that you should really learn from China. What would you say about that? What's the actual reality behind it?
I think there are a lot of reasons combined together. Before the so-called opening up to the West, China experienced different political campaigns and then cultural revolution. So when the cultural revolution ended around 1976, the economy of China's economy was on the very verge of total collapse because communism and planning economy just didn't work. And people, millions of people, or I think 40 million people starved to death during the so-called Great Leap Forward movement. So at that time, I think the CCP, in order to survive, they had to easy up the control a little bit. Later, before that, they didn't even allow farmers to farm their own lands or to grow some vegetables in the corner of outside their house and sell in the market. So in late 1970s, they decided they have to ease up the control a little bit, allow people maybe to sell something in the market, and they try to adopt a certain percent of the so-called marketing or free marketing mechanism they learned from the West. So they try to open to the West. They welcome investment, and they try to learn advanced technology from the West. And for the Chinese people, I have to say, the Chinese people is one of the most hardworking people in the world. Right. And for so many years under the communist regime, they suffer absolute poverty, and they are so scared of poverty. Now, if only they were given a little bit of chance to make a little bit money, they worked much harder than any people around the world. I think the hardworking Chinese people make the biggest contribution to the development or economic development in China. Of course, there are a lot of other reasons, like you said. At any given time, there were millions of slave labor detained in the detention center. Like I myself, when I was in camp, I was forced to work sometimes overnight, every day from 5:30 till midnight, and we were not given any payment, 1 penny. So millions, or maybe tens of millions, no payment at all, and we were working
so you're saying that
hard.
you think that the government in a situation also forces the people to work, the citizens to work, and sometimes work extra hours, work all night, but you don't get paid.
Yes, every detention center, every prison, and especially, why the labor camp is called a labor camp. The full name is re-education through forced labor, because according to Marxism theory, the people, evolved from apes into human beings through labor. So labor is very glorious. It's a good thing to do. And they believe if we work you hard, or we make you work hard, believe you can change from a bad person into a good person. So that's why they re-educate you through forced labor. So that's their theory. So it's just so justified for them to just use all of us as slaves. So those, I think, slave labor, and like you said, cheap land, and they don't care about the pollution, or there's no, proper protection for the workers. And I think most of, and also
and there are absolutely no labor laws to protect the labor.
All laws are there, but those laws are never being actually executed in real life. There are all sorts of every sort of laws in China, but they are just empty words. So people never pay any heed to the laws. And of course, I think the West helped a lot with this as well by investing a lot into China, and they kowtow into the CCP because they think they would have a huge market in China if they were allowed into China. And China also keep, stealing advanced technology from the West, to force the Western companies to transfer their technology to China, and they dump their cheap market into the international world. The West, I think the international world opened up their markets to the CCP, for the CCP to take, I think, advantage of. There are many loopholes. So they dump their products, they have unfair competition advantage. So all these issues or elements combined together to create the several or 3 or 4 decades of fast GDP growth in China. But that kind of growth cannot last forever. I think now it's till its very end.
Okay, I'll since you mentioned CCP, the Communist Party of China, I will come to that in a bit. But now moving on to the relations of China with the world. So obviously this year we are seeing that China's image is getting tarnished one after the other after another incident. The Hong Kong incident has happened. There's been Indo-China face-off at the Ladakh border, and there's so many things happening now. US is also unhappy with China. What do you have to say particularly about the Hong Kong riots, and also about the security bill that has recently been passed? Because there's so much unhappiness amongst the youngsters of Hong Kong after that incident.
Yes, I think the situation is in Hong Kong, I think reflects one very important issue, that the CCP is the enemy of freedom or of the free world. Although it has taken back Hong Kong and it has promised that it will maintain Hong Kong's autonomy for at least 50 years. But in reality, the CCP are governed by violence, by control all the free flow of information and the freedom of the people. So the freedom, I think, in Hong Kong embarrassed the CCP. And it's in their nature because they are against any kind of freedom. The CCP is all about control people and make people like their slaves. They control people how you should think, how they control not only physically control you, they only want to control your mind and soul. You need to really love the party from the bottom of your heart. So their nature is to control, to practice totalitarianism, and to have absolute control of every individual in the society. And Hong Kong is a place that they cannot control. And especially after some unsuccessful push to this piece of law, like back as early as in 2003 something, they tried to push they say there's a so-called 23rd article of the Basic Law. The Hong Kong people, 500,000 of them took to the street and pushed back. So it was unsuccessful. So after that, it has attempted to push forward this sort of bill, extradition bill, like in last year, and all unsuccessful. And so they saw that they cannot control people's thoughts in Hong Kong. They cannot control those youngsters, these freedom-loving Hong Kongers.
So just because you want to control them, just because you want to control everything that the youngsters are feeling, or that they want to write their freedom of speech, just in order to, you're saying, to curb that, this bill was passed.
Yes, I think because they have absolute control of everything inside China. And they say, oh, now Hong Kong is part of China. Why shouldn't we have the same kind of control? They can't help themselves, to not to do what they are doing. So that's why they totally, after, so only in 1 month, they push forward this like you said, national security law for Hong Kong, and then the world is pushing back against that. And so people come and just, the British used 100 years to build up such a beautiful city as Hong Kong, and the CCP destroyed it in a matter of months. So that's what I think is their nature.
What do you think is the solution for this problem that we're now seeing in Hong Kong? What do you think the people of Hong Kong, the youngsters of Hong Kong, should do? Of course, they're protesting, but what exactly do you think?
Yeah, I admire them very much for their courage. They are continuing, protesting and in different
Jennifer,
ways.
could I request you to talk a little louder? I think I cannot hear you clearly.
Hello, can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah, Jennifer, could I request you to talk a little louder?
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me now?
Better now. Yeah.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So I think for the youngsters, I admire them very much. They are really stand against this atrocity of the CCP, and I always say that they are not only fight for themselves but for the entire world.
Jennifer, I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry. Could I request you to probably try and connect again, or could you check the connection on your end?
Maybe I can hear you. I can hear you.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can. I can hear you fine.
Okay, so in the live stream, your volume is coming a little lower.
A little bit. Let me see if I can. I've already.
Okay, so what I'll do is, you can stay on the. Okay, so people who are watching us live, they are saying that we are able to hear you. Okay, all right.
They are able to hear you. Okay,
all right. Okay. Thank you, whoever's replied. Thank you.
Okay,
please go ahead, Jennifer. So you were talking about what is the solution to this Hong Kong problem?
I think I felt my heart really pained me to see all those youngsters got arrested and beaten up, or maybe transferred to mainland China somewhere and become victims and disappeared. Many of them actually got killed. So I think for Hong Kong people, if they have the condition to leave Hong Kong and to seek asylum or become have residency, I think many countries are willing to accept. I owned an object them leaving, and actually I think if they have the condition to leave, they should or they can choose to leave to preserve and to continue their fight maybe in other countries. And if they choose to stay, I hope they can try to continue their fight in the more maybe wise ways. Think of, I think they can choose to not cooperate with the CCP, with the Chinese Communist Party, and at the same time try to look after themselves, be careful to their own safety, and continue the fight. And sometimes you need to bide with the time, and I think the time is on Hong Kong people's side. It's not on the CCP side. The weight is turning, and I hope they should have the patience to fight with think about some long-term solutions.
All right, so you're saying that there can be a solution. The people of Hong Kong should not lose their hope. The youngsters should not lose their hope, and they should continue the fight. And the time is on the side of Hong Kong. All right, yes. Moving on to the next question, Jennifer, I have to ask you that, we cannot ignore that recently there was the India-China face-off at the border, yes, at the LAC. And now in India, while this situation, how we feel Indians, was tackled really well by the government, by our government, we also hear reports and we also read reports that there was some anger in China about how China and how the CCP handled the situation with the face-off with India. What do you have to say about that?
In China, if you ask me how Chinese people are thinking about this India-China face-off or whatever relationship there is. Inside China, there are all sorts of people, and there are, if we divide them into two major groups, one group is they only know or they only read what the government tells them. They only have the information from inside of China. And there are some others who jump over the great firewall of the CCP built to access free information. So these two groups of people have very different views and reactions towards this Indo-China face-off. If you only read official reports, the government only says very vaguely that the India is doing this, that. They didn't get into details and why this happened and how this happened. They even avoid saying how many Chinese soldiers actually died. So people have very one-sided story and limited information. So of course they were angry. Oh, India is invading us, is doing this bad thing of us. We need to defend our territory, our sovereignty. That of sort of empty, bigger words. But there are many other Chinese people who do have access to the free information, and some of them are living outside of China. So for them, many of them know that the CCP nature is evil. It never care about human life, and sometimes it will purposely create some kind of tensions with other countries to divert their attention. They have a lot of internal crisis. If they create a national enemy now, so people will all talk about the war between maybe India or America, nobody would talk about their own problems again. So all these could be their tactics. That's why they create, they want to control this, not to go too far, but they do want some kind of external pressure or conflicts or problems to divert people's attention and to make them look good and look strong. They are defending the country, so the country still needs the CCP.
Jennifer, it's interesting you're saying that China is trying to play these tactics within their own country because there are also so many internal issues. Also, some of the reports we're hearing, and I'm saying we are hearing these reports because, actually there is no clear information. You always, when it comes to China, there's no clear information out in the world. You just have to rely on some of the reports that come out. So some of the reports also said that, now because of the flood situation in China, people are all the more unhappy. And how's the government dealing with that? How's the CCP dealing with that?
Yes, I think the people's anger is growing. Actually, this morning I just put a video there. Over 10,000 people of so-called Guzheng town in Anhui province in southern China was trapped by the water, like just last night. It was dark, there was no power, no communication, and the government didn't give them a notice to evacuate. Up to this morning, local time, 10 o'clock, still 10,000 of them were stuck or trapped in the water. Yeah, 10,000. So, you know, I think 27 provinces out of like some over 30 provinces in China were all affected by this flooding, and the historic flooding. It's even bigger than the flood in 1998. But up to now, we didn't see any CCP leaders go into the affected area to inspect the situation, to try to organize rescue and you know, relief efforts to the people, to offer people relief. On the contrary, you know, because we all know this Three Gorges Dam, it was a big project for the CCP, like a big political achievement for them. Yes. Yeah, the dam project. So people all know this dam is very dangerous. The water, the flood level is at a very dangerous level now, and the dam is, you know, experiencing huge pressure. And in order to release the pressure, to reduce the pressure the dam is having, the CCP secretly released the flood without notifying the people living under streams. So that's why the flood situation, it's not only come from the rain, but also the dam. They're releasing the water to reduce. Without
information and without prior information, they open the gates of dams.
Yes. And one of the, I think the CCP officials said, they purposely choose not to tell the public that they are releasing water. Yes, because if you release the water from any dam or from some river purposely to release pressure, they have decided maybe they want to protect the big city, but sacrifice a smaller city or the countryside. People may ask for compensation if you flooded us this area on purpose and our crops also got our land all got flooded, we should ask compensation from the government. But if they choose not to say anything, people can only regard it as a natural disaster. So if it is a natural disaster, you know, the government doesn't have any responsibilities. That's why they choose.
You can just say it's an act of God and it's a natural disaster, and we can't do much about this.
It's a rain. It's everybody you know, got flooded. What can we do? We are doing our best. So
Jennifer, this brings me to also a very important question, because you're talking about, you know, how this was done without telling people or giving them any prior information. Do you think that, you know, so many decisions that the Chinese government takes, that the CCP takes, there is very less value for life of the people of China, in China, people who live there? There's very less value of life, or there's no value of life? Do you think that it's very sad?
Yes, I think one of the very important nature of the CCP is that they don't value human life, a human's life at all. Sometimes they regard people as just a moving piece of meat. So that's why, you know, I'm not sure whether your audience have heard about the live organ harvesting. They actually, regard a human being as an organ bank, as organ storage, and we raise you, we keep you alive, just so that one day, if we need your organ, we can kill you, we can take out your organs, and we can sell them to make big profits. They've been doing this for, you know, ever since the crackdown of Falun Gong, and actually before that, only the crackdown of Falun Gong, because of the sheer numbers of Falun Gong practitioners, somewhere between 70 to 100 million, gave them a big, you know, a storage of organ. That's why the organ transplant number of the CCP jumped, you know, higher skyrocketing after the crackdown of Falun Gong. So if they can kill people to sell their organs, why would they bother? If there's a flood, they will protect you on their cost. If you die, you die. You know, they don't have any cost. Maybe they would regret they cannot kill you to sell your organs. So that's the attitude the CCP has.
So that's why
of life. Yeah.
So that's why you're saying that there is, of course, there is very less or absolutely no value for life of the people of China who live in the country. All right, moving on to another question. I also have to ask you about US. So you live in USA. First of all, if you can tell us, you know, how did you, when did you move to USA? And now that you're living there, you must be hearing about the US-China relations also getting spoiled and the whole trade argument. What is the sentiment there? What is the sentiment in USA, please?
Yes, I moved to US in 2011, and so it's almost 10 years now. So I witnessed the change of the US-China relationships during this 10 years, from, you know, engaging China, embracing China, to what we are now. I think several years ago, maybe since 2016, since this new President Trump took office, I think the overall narrative of the CCP changed little by little. Now I think it's a very important strategic change between the relationships of US and China, from regarding China as a strategic partner to a strategic competitor, or even rival, or even some you know, politicians or congressperson even call China or CCP as an enemy. And now I think it's very important, and also the general public. I think it's both the two major parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. They are some people of them are joking. They are fighting with each other all the time. But there's one thing that can unite them together. Yeah, that's common. They are all opposed the CCP.
And that's the anger. That's the anger towards China.
Yes, especially this pandemic. You know. Before the pandemic, the U.S. economy is so well. The markets, the share markets have created one of another record high all the time, and the unemployment is at a historic record low, and the GDP is growing well, and everybody was, you know, having a job, that sort of thing. And suddenly, when the pandemic came, and because of the cover-ups of the CCP, it spread to US. The US now is suffering the most, you know, mentality outside of maybe of China. We don't know the real numbers of China. So many people, they are still dying, and it's still very serious, this problem, and the whole country, you know, shut down, and the economy, you know, all their achievements was wiped off by this pandemic. And so many people suffer from, you know, either they suffer from losing loved ones or losing their jobs, and so many businesses were forced to close down. And so people gradually wake up from their illusions. Like in the beginning, I think the majority of the US people have somehow were convinced by a view that if we help the China to achieve economic development after they have enough wealthy middle class, they were naturally pursued for democracy, and China will join the world as a democratic country. But that actually, it's just a wishful wish of the romantic Westerners. But after, I think, 40 years of what the CCP has been doing, they suddenly realized that would not ever happen. And what's more, the CCP has infiltrated the Western world so much. Their power their spokesperson, their media, their lobbyists were everywhere and inside the US
all the
state.
lobbies. You're saying all the lobbies exist in USA as well, so it's not going to happen. But that also brings me to I have to ask you this question: that do you think that USA now thinks that not China but India can come to the rescue and India can be the big market now? And then India can turn out to be a competition for China, because that's the ongoing discussion in India now, that, we are now ready to probably give competition to China. We also want to make our own products. We want to go local. What is the sentiment in US about India?
I think the sentiment about India is it's of course, I think, a very good alternative to the CCP. People are now reflecting, we've made a big mistake by put all the supply chain in China, like in this pandemic. They suddenly realize all the masks, or the medical materials, even some basic, very important medicines like antibodies were all produced in China. If China, started to post on some sort of sanction, or if they refuse, they actually did so. They threatened many countries with, if we are not happy with you, we're not going to sell your masks. So they threatened this world. So the US suddenly realized they had made a huge mistake by transferring all the supply chain to such a country. And now they think they are, I think, seriously considering to reduce this risk and transfer some of the supply chain to other countries, to better places. And I think the Trump administration started to talk about the Indo-Pacific strategy several years ago. So they've already, come to include the India area and the Indian Ocean area as part of the global strategy. They've realized the geopolitical threat the CCP is imposing. I think they want to have a more active role, and I definitely believe the US, because India is also a democratic country. The two countries share the same values, so it's easier for them to talk. If for the CCP, I think the assistant to the present Security National Affairs, Mr. Brian said, the ideology is. The ideology is more reliable, and it's more reliable, and there's a rule of law, and I think the ideology is also very different. There were never big wars broke out between two democratic countries, but there were always wars broke out between the free world and the totalitarian regime. So, and because the CCP is exactly one.
And because India is a democratic country, do you also think that possibly China can learn some lessons from India in terms of like free speech, in terms of democracy? Because in India, there's always, a discussion about freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Do we have enough freedom to, express what we feel? But when you actually look at China, you see that, people are not even allowed to be on social media. The moment you say anything against the government, it's taken off. And then, there are still cases where the doctors who were talking about the coronavirus and how it spread and stuff like that, those doctors were not found. So many stories we hear about. But what do you feel about the situation that can China learn something from India in terms of free speech or in terms of democracy?
Well, of course, China should have learned from India and from other free countries. I'd like to add, actually, India can also learn from Taiwan. Taiwan is, I think, acting very actively now. When the CCP is doing so much, damage to the world, Taiwan shows to the world we can offer help, we can sell masks, we can do a great job in this pandemic fighting. So Taiwan is playing a more active role in the world stage as a benign force, and I think India can do the same. I don't say, of course, the Chinese people or China can learn from India and from Taiwan, but it would not as long as the CCP is in power. Like we already discussed, it hates the freedom, it hates the democracy. That's why it has the so-called One Belt, One Road initiative. It wants to replace the freedom and the democracy with this CCP model. They want to promote their model of ruling to the entire world. So that's why they are trying to do this One Belt, One Road initiative. They will not learn from the free world. They want to crush the free
So they will
world,
still run their so they will still run their CCP model of development.
Yes,
okay.
And their goal is to take down all existing social systems and to promote their own model for the entire world.
Also, Jennifer, I have to ask you that, you grew up in China, you grew up in Beijing, if I'm not wrong. And what do the Chinese people think about Indians? Because that's something that we find very, very intriguing as to what do the Chinese people think about us as? Do you think about us Indians as a race who are very ethical, who we follow our traditions? What do you think about India? And also, does China, as I asked earlier, does China see India as a competition in the world market?
Yes, I think so, because India and China, the two countries, have a lot of similarities. They are both very ancient, civilization, and they have a big population. They are still in some sort of developing stage. They learn from the West, the technologies. They have a lot of talented people. So in this regard, and also India have also cheap labor relatively. So in this regard, there are a lot of good competition between these two countries. But regarding how Chinese people look at India, I think there are a very famous joke in China. If you watch CCTV, that China Central Television every day. So in their half hour news broadcast, first 50 minutes is about how great China is. The second 50 minutes, second half is how terrible the world is, how terrible.
So you're saying before any news report or before any program that plays on TV, there's like 10 minutes of first how great China is.
Yes, and then the second half is how terrible the world is. The other countries is, of course, including India.
Right.
So I think in the official narrative of the CCP, it tries to portray India as a backward country.
Jennifer, I'm so sorry once again. I think your video has gotten switched off. Are you still on the video? Yeah, now you're there. Yes. Sorry, please continue.
Yes, it portrays this.
The second half is about how bad the world is.
Yes, including India. So I think in the Chinese official narrative, India is a backward country. It's not as good as China. It has so many populations. Poverty is still everywhere. And even some ordinary Chinese people refers to Indian people like a very, I think, with very negative terms. Like,
really?
I'm not sure.
So the Chinese people think that.
Hindu, Assam. I'm not sure. Hindu is for India. Assam is some like the third like brother in the family. I don't know. That has a very negative connotation in that term. So like they look down upon India in some sense.
Even till now, you're saying that.
Yes.
You're saying even till now, the people of China look at Indians in a very negative light, and they still think of India as like a country of poverty and problems.
Yes, because they didn't get like I said, the proper information.
Right information.
Yes, so somehow they still regard India as a very backward country, a lot of poverty, a lot of population, and of course there are also a potential competition to China. Yes, so that's and I think the majority of the time they pay more attention, of course, to US. And if they want to go abroad to live to study, they want to go either US or European countries. So I don't think much of them will consider India. Of course, many smart Chinese people try to maybe go to India to make some money.
But Jennifer, there's a lot of there's a huge community of Indians also there living in China, and some of the Indian students are also there in China. How do the people see them as?
China, I think, under the party's hatred, like culture or kind of environment, they either regard, it's a very strange, I think they never have normal relationship between people of the other world. They either regard the foreigners as someone we can take advantage of or someone we can look down upon. Or sometimes we should maybe form an alliance with maybe African people. Maybe now we treat them good.
I'll come to that point about how China is building roads in other countries. Yes, please continue.
So that's kind of, I think, never a healthy attitude. Like in Western countries, people are just one individual and another individual. We are equal. We are the same. We treat each other kindly. But in China, it's among Chinese people, you are either above me or you are below me. Or if you are having a better life than me, maybe I envy you, I respect you. Or if you are my leader, I have to listen to you, I have to kowtow to you. But if you live worse than me, I look down upon you. I bully you. So that kind of a very, very tragic attitude. Sometimes when they react with foreigners, it's the same. If you are better off than me, I envy you, I respect you, I try to learn from you. If you are worse off than me, I don't care much about you. So that's a very sad, psychological phenomenon that is doing this. Not among every Chinese people, but there are many that
many people who think like that. All right.
Yes.
All right. Jennifer, also coming to another important question, which is about the Road and Belt Initiative that China is now taking, that China is now doing. China, we know, is making roads and ports in Kenya and African countries, also in Central Asia, also in Pakistan. So, which brings problem to us in India also, because we also question it. So, do you think that this whole initiative and this whole goal by the CCP will be achieved? Because there are so many internal issues within China. Do you think they'll be able to do this? What exactly is the final plan?
No, I think when the CCP started off this initiative several years ago, they were very confident that they could do it because as we discussed, they experienced the fastest growth for several decades, and they became the #1 country in the entire world in terms of GDP. So those all gave them this kind of false illusion that they could now dominate this world. So they want to promote, their influence, or they expand their influence globally. That's why they started off this One Belt, One Road initiative. That's their global ambition. And another reason, I think, important reason, is because, in China, after, like I said, that kind of growth model could not last forever. So many big factories, construction, enterprises inside China, and also some of their banks, they have surplus productivity, or they don't have enough job inside China or construction power capability, so they want to export their productivity, their capacity, or their capability outside of China. So that's another very important reason why they say, we'll help you build these roads, and we'll borrow you money, or we'll lend you money to do so. They actually want to find jobs for their constructors inside China, where they could no longer they've built up all those buildings, empty buildings. No
Right.
people actually really need that much because they have a very unhealthy GDP growth. So they build up buildings and they push them down and then build up new buildings again. So a surplus productivity, they want to export it to other countries, and they lend them money, and at the same time, gradually they want to control the natural resources and some kind of natural, like the ports. They want to use as
that's the hidden agenda, you're saying.
Yes, so that's of that kind of their calculation. But with ever since I think the trade war with the US began, the problems emerge. People see from inside China, more and more people are saying that kind of development model in China cannot last forever because they have no ability to do technical innovation. They don't have a core ability to develop themselves. They rely on stealing technology and relying on the foreign market and the investment. Many Chinese people inside China actually don't have that kind of capability to consume all these goods from in China. So when this trade war started and all the unhealthy problems, elements in China started to emerge or reflected, and people start seeing it. And now I think with this pandemic, they lose so much of the export market. And now it's experiencing very bad situation, like also this flood. So I don't think it can continue that sort of Chinese people call them throughout their money everywhere to win to win their power or their legitimacy.
So you're saying China
votes in the UN.
So you're saying that possibly, which is very much possible, that China will probably not be able to achieve the Rodal Belt Initiative and not achieve the final thing.
No, I think the foreign currency reserve is disappearing very fast. Many Chinese people.
Could it turn out to be a disaster? Can I use that word? Could it turn out to be a big disaster for China? Because now China is already losing all the export market. What could happen?
Yes, I think you can call it a disaster. It will manifest very soon. It is manifesting now. In terms of they are controlling people. Its ability. Initially, one individual can at least exchange maybe $50,000 per year. Now they are taking away this kind of, it's not for ordinary Chinese citizens. Even if you have money, you want to exchange for foreign or for US dollars, you can't do it in a bank because they don't have enough of US dollars like before. So they're controlling people. Some of these government officials, their passports were even taken away by the government. The government didn't allow them to go abroad to consume, to buy goods from other countries. So people outside of China may have not realized it, but people inside China are experiencing much more difficult time to even to exchange a very small amount of US dollars.
And also on the, if I'm not wrong, many of the, and also if I'm not wrong, there are many companies that are on the verge of bankruptcy in China, and that's also causing a lot of internal issues, a lot of internal debt in the country.
Yes, I think another big problem, like I said, is supply chain is moving out of China constantly in the past several years. And many companies internal companies, domestic companies inside China went bankruptcy. And the employment situation is also very, very bad in China. Some people estimated there could be up to 200 million people employed. in China, especially after this pandemic. The global situation changed for the worse for the CCP and also its internal situation. So all these phenomena put together, they are having a very hard time now.
Very, very hard time. Okay. Finally, Jennifer, I have to end the interview with a very important question, and this interview will not be complete without talking about Tibet. Now, do you think the world knows about the anger of Tibetans towards China and what China did? Do you think that India could possibly play a very big role, and there would be one day when Tibet will be free, if that's not a very big statement to make?
Yes, I think Tibetan people have been suffering so badly under the Chinese Communist Party. You know, before the CCP came to power, Tibetan people and Chinese people enjoyed a very good relationship. They lived together. They practice their own, religious beliefs. But since the CCP came into power, like Dalai Lama escaped, and Tibetan people were allowed now to practice their own religion, to worship Dalai Lama, or worship Buddha. And many people are worrying if this kind of situation continues, Tibetan culture and even its language could disappear. And I think India has offered a great help, like giving some kind of condition for the exile Dalai Lama.
We have a huge refugee community of Tibetans in India.
Yes, where he can continue his efforts to either to preach his teachings to the entire world and to the peace-loving people in the world. And I think actually the CCP has been targeting every time a different group, a minority of the society. And before, I think this year, each time when they target maybe Tibetan, when they target Xinjiang, when they target Falun Gong, when they target these students in Tiananmen Square, people all somehow think, oh, it's just a small amount of people in China. Although it's banned, but what can we do? China is so far away from us. Or maybe what we can do is just to say a few words to say, oh, this is not good. But the world really, I think, hasn't done enough to stop the CCP from killing. And the consequences is, if they can't be stopped, if they are allowed to kill its own people, to kill Tibetans, to kill Uyghurs, to kill Falun Gong people, Hong Kong people, why should they bother not to kill people in India, in America? If the same kind of bad guy can do this to its own people, can you expect it will treat other people better? So we should, I think, look at this issue now, and I think we've suffered human life losses enough. Now it's time for us to stand up to say that this regime, this evil party, should not exist. They are a criminal organization. They are worse than terrorists, because terrorists only don't have a state power behind them. Even if they stage a war, or the one time they may kill 100 or at most 1,000, but Chinese Communist Party could kill millions, hundreds of millions. Communism is the biggest disaster for the entire world. So it is high time we recognize this reality. And most of the Chinese people, I think, they also wish that they can live as free, as prosper life as people in the other part of the country. They can also enjoy the same kind of human dignity. So I think it's time for the world and the people inside China to join force together and to stop the CCP from doing more evil to mankind.
All right, all right. On that note, Jennifer, I have to say a huge thank you to you. You're joining us today from US, and you answered all important questions about Falun Gong, about you being imprisoned 4 times when you lived there, when you grew up in China. Tiananmen Square was also an incident when you were involved there. Also, you talked about Hong Kong, you talked about US, Indo-China relations, and how there are internal issues in China. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thanks a lot for joining with us on Bharat Voice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you. Bye-bye.